So welcome everyone to today's session around Orchestrator. We're going to be spending about the next 45 minutes together going through really kind of the Orchestrator tool set and how it can possibly help you. Hopefully the majority of the people that are on the call are leveraging it. To me, it's one of the biggest enhancements JD has had in a really, really long time, and it adds tons and tons of values to organizations. Once you kind of get the back-end understanding of how it works and some of the use cases. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Brian Rose. I'm one of the VPs here in our JD Edwards practice. I've been at Terillium for about 10 years now, and I was one of the fortunate ones that, fortunate or unfortunate, I'd say, that started using the Orchestrator back when it first came out in the 2014, 2015 timeline. And it's pretty incredible the amount of transition that's happened in that, 8-ish year period of time. Back when creating orchestrations was a pretty difficult task, now it's really, really simple, and there's a lot of new features associated to it. If you have any questions throughout and you haven't been on one of these webinars before, there is a questions drop down. Feel free to ask as we go through this. I'll try and stop if I see them, but if not, we will have just a standard set amount of time at the end of today's session for me to go through those and answer any questions that you may have. So the other quick thing too is we are recording this. You'll get this email to you tomorrow, so you'll have access to the recording. So you don't have to feverishly take notes on or anything like that. You can always watch that at your leisurely after today's session. This is our agenda for today. So I am going to do a high-level overview of Orchestrator. So I know, or I would think, a decent amount of people on the call are like, yep, I've used Orchestrator today. We use it heavily, but there's lots of customers and organizations that I talk to that are like, hey, we're just trying to understand the components of Orchestrator and how each of the pieces come together. So I'll be spending, about 10 minutes going through a high-level overview of what Orchestrator is, what some of the components are, some use cases that I've seen people leverage more from a theory perspective. Then I'm going to dive into some examples, and those examples are going to be rooted in a couple of things. One, managing integration. So, as different third-party bolt-ons become more and more seen with the JD Edwards tool set, I see a lot of organizations saying, hey, can we leverage our current integration tool, right, Orchestrator, to do whether it's flat file or API type transactions? And the answer to that is yes. And it's a pretty simple process of how to create them and build them. And I'll go through some examples, both flat file and API based. And then the second piece of that is going to be around just some automation type activities. So, simple things that you have to do in JD where you're like, man, there's got to be, an easy button type of thing, right? Things like speed status updates or reversing a purchase order, or even redating orders, whether they're sales orders, purchase orders, work orders en masse, right? Things like that, which are, a little bit difficult today and somewhat clunky, leveraging the Orchestrator tool set to build out those types of efficiencies. So those are the two kind of groupings or areas that I'm going to be spending time on, and from a demonstration perspective. I'm also going to talk about a couple of, I would call, kind of neat things that are inside of Orchestrator that I really like. The filter tool on applications that don't have a QBE line. The ability to create orchestrations directly from a service request, where it's determining all your outputs and inputs and all of that for you, so you don't have to do it yourself. And then there is a new capability around passing in variables when you're running a UBE, right? So if a great example there is a lot of organizations have purchase order print forms, and maybe for one branch it looks like this, and for one branch it looks like that, and you utilize version control to determine which form gets associated to that PO print. You can now determine at runtime which version to grab when you're selecting or pushing the same button inside of Orchestrator. So that was something we saw as it was a limitation in the past, and now you can pass in a variable to determine which version do you want to run of that individual UBE. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but if you don't know Turling, we've been around a long time. We've got about 200 plus employees, and our sweet spot has always been the Oracle tool set, specifically JD Edwards. So if you need any help, feel free to reach out. That's my sales pitch for today. So for those of you that were on the past webinar that I did about a month ago, a couple of these slides are similar, and the reasoning for that is I want to make sure everyone kind of understands what you get with the Release 23 update specifically. And so it's got to be a 927 tools, 64-bit architecture. You're going to get all the newest UX1 features, Orchestrator Studio, Workflow Studio, some enhanced security. There's some new features around zero downtime deployments. And the goal of these releases is to allow you to take these kind of bite-sized chunks throughout the year from an upgrade perspective. You know, the goal is not to wait 5-7 years and then have to do a major upgrade again, right? That was the methodology of the past, big expensive upgrades going from XE or World or even 9.0 to 9.2. Those days are kind of gone. Right now, going from a 9.2 tools to another 9.2 tools, whether that's Release 22 to Release 23 or an incremental increase, it's not a massive undertaking anymore. And that's for a purpose, right? The purpose is to allow you to take those, like I said, bite-sized chunks and utilize the tools versus having to wait years and years and years to get it. If you haven't been to Learn JD, I'm sure everyone on this call has, but it is a great repository for all things training and the announcements and new features. So if you ever want to, say, hey, what came out in Release 23, the tool that came out, or the release that came out in January, or the one that came out in October, it gives a great little example of, hey, these are the features, and a lot of them have OBEs, Oracle by Examples, as well, where it'll walk you through the process to build those out. So highly recommend the Learn JDE platform. It has a lot of really good information in it. And these are some of the key features that did come out in Release 23. We're going to be talking about some of these today, and we're also going to be talking about other features that come out in Release 22 type of time frame, but calling orchestration from workflow, logic extensions on form extensions, the ability to do some open API RESTful call type activities, so excluding your orchestrations from the open API document. I'll talk a little bit about how you can also define inputs for scheduled orchestration. So similar to what you could do with determining what version to run right at runtime of a UBE, you can do something similar on the scheduled orchestrations, right? Where you went on runtime of that scheduled orchestration, what variables do you want to have inputted into that? And then the other piece, a lot of file type enhancements, whether it's consuming files, importing, exporting files, launching orchestrations from Compose page, the ability to pop messages on the glass that came out in the kind of the later portion of Release 22, but that was a massive improvement, because in the past it was kind of you hit the OK button or the submit button and you hope it works, right? You don't get kind of that immediate feedback. Now with the messages, you do have the capability to have some immediate feedback, okay? So I talked earlier about how I'm going to spend a couple of minutes, right, talking about Orchestrator. What is it? How can it be used? So I really like this depiction because I think it's pretty accurate in terms of what most organizations are leveraging Orchestrator for, right? So absolutely, it gives you the capability to gather information from the outside, whether it's IoT, integrations to your CRM, whether it's Salesforce, your MES system possibly. So getting information from the outside, bringing it in and hitting tables, whether those are EDI tables, standard P48013 for work order entry, whatever it might be. It is a great tool for those types of activities. That's kind of been how many people have always thought of what Orchestrator can be used for. I think in the past 2 to 3 years, more and more organizations leverage it for kind of inside of their 4 walls optimization, right? So inside of JDE, yes, it's great. I can get information from third-party systems, and I'm going to be talking about that today. But inside of JDE, how can I optimize and automate processes, right? Think of it like an RPA tool, like a macro. How can I say, if I do this, this, and this, do it over and over again for this huge subset? That's something, or a type of use case you could do with Orchestrator. And what's great about it is it's doing these functions as if an end user did it, right? And the reason why I bring that up specifically is when you do things like business services or any type of coding, you need to tell the system the rules, right? You need to give the system the guidelines and the rails to say, stay within these rails. When this gets put in, validate this, validate that, right? With Orchestrator, it does all of that for you because it's doing it as if you or I were in the system. So if I put in a bad item number, it's going to say, hey, you put in a bad item number. If I clicked, the wrong form in a process, it's going to pop up and say, hey, Brian, you're in the wrong form. And there's no logic that you have to build to do that. So that kind of business gold is what the biggest value you're going to get with Orchestrator. It's leveraging everything that the system is built on. It's just allowing you to automate it. So this is the Orchestrator Studio, and I'm going to jump into this in a second. But this is where all of your orchestrations are really managed and built. Some things like service requests are using the old language. Service request used to be form request and data request. Now they split them out. So if you're doing, where I was going with that is if you're using something like a form request, some people do that via the process recorder, which you don't have to be in Orchestrator Studio to do, but this is the repository that allows you to manage all your orchestrations and build out the different types of features associated to them. So now that I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and jump into my demonstration like I talked about earlier. These are the 3 key areas we're going to be focusing on: improve your integrations, automating some routine efficiencies, and also some neat different Orchestrator components that I want to chat about. So from today's perspective, I have JDE open here in one tab, Orchestrator Studio open in another tab. So I want to jump in here and just quickly talk through Orchestrator as a whole, right? And this is going to be a 5-10 minute flyby, but for those that are just getting used to Orchestrator or don't know some of the features around it, that's what the goal of the next couple of minutes is going to be. So the analogy I always like to use with orchestrations is it's similar to a home, right? So if you have a home, but you don't have furniture, you don't have your family, you don't have your dogs, right? It's not really what you want it to be. You need those components to build out your home, changing it from a house to a home. So this is really just the shell. All of the components and the processes within it are in these little green icons here, right? So the form requests, the data requests, your reports, any types of rules you want to set up, your messages for emails, right? This is where all of your logic is kind of being built out. And there's a couple of these which I'm going to spend most of my time on, which is what is used 95% of the time, right? So example, we don't see many organizations leveraging something like whitelists or cross-references. They're out there, right? You can leverage them. Even things like custom requests and logic extensions is fairly new. Those are things that are nice to have, right? But if I was someone, or if someone asked me, hey, Brian, if I want to learn Orchestrator and be good at it, what are some of the components I should really master, right? And what those are form requests, data requests, reports, and rules, right? Those are, if you have those locked in, and rules is a very easy one, right? So, but if you have those, the skill set around those, you're going to be putting yourself in a very good position to where when you get in a conversation, you're like, hey, I can do this, I can do that, because that's where kind of the bread and butter is, right? So what is a form request? A form request is like, I'm going to a JDE form in the web, right? Example, if I want to create a work order, I would go to P48013, I'd click the add button, I'd put in my item number, the date I wanted to be completed by, the quantity, and I'd click the save button. So I would capture all of those clicks in a form. That is a form request, okay? A data request is more pulling information from a table or a view to use in future steps of an orchestration, right? I want to go and find who is the primary supplier for a specific item, or is a specific what is a specific customer's credit limit and where are they at today, right? So more kind of grabbing information so I can determine and make decisions on it from a down the road type of perspective. Reports are what they sound like, right? If I want to run PO print, or I want to run R31410 work order processing, that is how we run reports. And then rules is really just a yes/no type of strategy, right? So if I want to create different avenues for an orchestration to go down, an example, if I'm doing something like a work order clock in, and I want to first check when someone clocks in, if they're already clocked into another work order, I can do a check to say, hey, are they clocked into a work order? If the answer is yes, clock them out of that work order, right, and clock them into the new work order. If the answer to that question is no, I would then just auto clock them into a work order. So those are kind of the rules that you would set up throughout the process to make these orchestrations go down that different structure based on your needs. So jumping into this one quick example here, right? So if I show a form request, remember I talked earlier about the work order completion. So all of those steps that you would go through to create a work order, from looking up, or sorry, this is doing a work order completion. So looking up what work order am I doing the completion on, selecting the first row, then going into my work order completion and inputting in my quantity, right? All of those steps that an end user would do, it is being captured in here, right? So think of it like a macro in Excel. I can capture all the steps I have to do something and then do them over and over and over again from an automation perspective. Putting an order on hold, which is what I'm going to be showing you later on today, updating a date, changing the status of an order, whatever it might be. Those are all leveraging these form requests to go into the form and make those updates. Now, these can be changed, they can be managed, so you can see all of these available actions over here on the right side or left side of each of your screen, and those change based on the form that you're in, right? So if I'm in my my first form, which is looking for the work order, it's only going to show me a couple of options. If I go to my detail, I'm going to have a whole different set of options. And you'll see in here, I can return any of the fields. So if I want to return the work order number, or maybe the lot number that was generated when I created my work order completion, you can do all of those inside of these form requests, okay? Now, if I jump back and go into the second kind of big one, once again, is your data requests. I'm going to pull up actually a different one. This is that defining of the primary supplier example, right? So the primary supplier is determined at the item branch in my specific example here. So F4102, I'm going in, passing in my item number and my business unit, and I'm passing back my supplier number. So I'm gathering the information I need, maybe to generate a purchase order, right? Or to generate some type of inventory report of what supplier do I need to go out to when I have low inventory. So this is just me grabbing information to leverage in future steps of my orchestration. Reports is where I am running a specific report. So if I pull this guy here. This is an example of PO print. This is the variable I'll talk about a little bit later, but this is how you toggle what version you want to run. But you'll see in here, I can put in my report, what version am I running? I can override my version. So if I want to pass in specific data selection or override the processing options when I run this every single time, you can do that inside of the orchestrator. It's just dependent, once again, on what your specific needs are. And then finally, rules. And there's lots and lots of other ones in there, right? But for today's session, once again, if you're new to Orchestrator and you need to focus on areas that are going to add the most value, learn these 4, and you're going to be in a really, really good position. So this is the example I talked about earlier. I'm just doing a count of if someone has a specific labor count open. If they do, go down one path. If they don't, go down another. And the question may be, okay, I understand, I see how all these different components look, but like how do they come together? What do I, right? What is the process of building one of these or understanding the high level view? So if I come here. So this is something like a work order clock out, right? So I'd come in and the first step I do is I would get the current time. I would go and do that form request to clock myself out, and I would run that job, the R31-422, to post those hours. So this is me grabbing a couple of different components in succession and going through an entire business process, okay? So you first start with kind of building out the components, and then you then allocate or assign those to your orchestration steps to build out what the process ultimately needs to look like. And this could be very simple too. You know, it could be I'm just going and doing a meter reading, and then I'm going and updating my speed meter readings inside of JDE, right? We can make this very, very simple from a process perspective. In here too, you have all these different things like your connections, your scheduler, your orchestration monitor is where you're able to manage all of your different orchestrations inside of E1, right? Which ones are running good, which ones are running bad, how long are they running, what errors are you hitting. So that's a really nice tool that's been built over time. So that's the high level, right? And I could talk about Orchestrator for forever, but these are some of the key components that you're going to need to understand when you're first going through the activity of building out an orchestration, right? And this view will be, when I say this view, this studio may look a little bit different based on the release that you're in, right? So the newest releases is gonna have this visual view, and the earlier releases, it was good. It just wasn't as pretty, right? You won't have maybe access to some of the features like something like attachments or watch list, but depending on where you are in the tools release process, your different views may be a little bit different. But Studio is always where you're going to be building out your orchestrations. Okay, so a couple of the examples that we're going to be going through today, like I talked about, where we're going to start is on the integration side of the house. Okay, so let's first go in, and I'm going to log in to JDE. Loads up. Okay, so these are three kind of different examples, right, of integrations that you could do inside of JDE, right? One's a flat file integration. Maybe I'm grabbing information from a third-party procurement system, or a CRM, or an MES, or whatever it might be. I'm grabbing information in a flat file basis and coming into JDE and making updates. Or maybe I'm going and hitting an API, right? So I'm going out, I'm getting the weather, or I'm going out and getting some other information, right? So example here, if I put in, I'm just going to pull up here. I have VMA products, and I personally am a beer drinker, and maybe I want to know that, when I have a customer coming in town, what are the kind of 3 breweries in their area that I'd like to, be able to bring them out to? I could go ahead and select a row, and it will go out and hit. This is a free API, right? It's going to go and say, based on your current city, these are the 3 breweries, right, that are in town. We've got, 3 sheets. There's another one down the road on 140 Northeast Hill Street. It's a microbrewery, and the message back to me, right, is all based on one going out and hitting that API, passing it back into my messages, and giving me this information, right? And I'm also maybe like, oh, that's great, that sounds good. Maybe we should also check the weather in that area, right? So I can go ahead and say, hey, based on Albany, let's check the weather for this afternoon. Oh, it looks like it's going to be really cold. We better make sure we don't go anywhere that has an outside patio. And even for tomorrow, we've got some snow coming in. So this here is me directly going, and dependent on the city, right, that I am looking at. So I'm from Albany, New York, so I put in Albany. This is the information being pulled back in a real-time API. And there's millions and millions of APIs that are out there. Some are free, some are not. These are 2 examples of free ones that I'm leveraging, right? But the process of utilizing them is exactly the same, whether it's going out and rating a truck possibly, or determining the distance between 2 different, your location and where it needs to go from a supplier's perspective or a customer's perspective, and hitting, Google Maps. You can do all of that directly in this process. So it's really, really cool, and allows you to get information from all different spots. One of the new things that I think is going to change the game a little bit too is, for those of you that are on the chat GBT whirlwind, they do have some APIs that you're going to be able to connect into. I see that maybe being a possibility for doing that inside of Orchestrator, right? Asking some questions, maybe looking for some market information. Hey, I want to know about a customer. Can you bring me back all the information you can find about them, right? Boom. Maybe that's the opportunity, something you can do inside of a REST call. So kind of neat stuff. But this is me, once again, grabbing that information and pulling that in via that specific API that I'm leveraging, okay? Maybe another example is, I'm going to go ahead and you'll see I had 2 of them out here. I went and ran this add suppliers, and it automatically came in and added a new supplier. And what that's doing is it's going to an FTP site, and I'll show you in here. It's going to an FTP site, grabbing the file, processing it in, right? If it has 1,000 rows, if it has 5 rows, if it has 20,000 rows, right? And it's just iterating over that process over and over and over again inside of your orchestration, okay? So I want to now just give you some back-end understanding of how these work. So 2 of them specifically, right? The connections and the connector for the API, because that's certainly important. And then also how you may do it from a FTP perspective. So everything from integrations starts with your connections, okay? So like I talked about earlier, found this brewery API, and this is an open API. You don't need a password, you don't need a login. Now, if you do need to get that, or the token, or whatever it might be, right, you can set up different security protocols. But for this example, keeping it simple today, all I have to do is first determine what is my API endpoint, okay? So I create that initial connection for this specific brewery. Same type of thing if I were to do an FTP, right? So this is me consuming an Excel document or a CSV in the supplier situation, right? I have my host, my port, my username and password, and now I have that direct connection of being able to go out to that FTP, anything that gets dropped on it, now I can process that information in. So if you're doing any type of integration work, you're always going to have to start with your connections inside of Orchestrator Studio. Once you have that built out, next step here, oh, actually, I'm going to go this way. It'll be easier for you to see this. So here, this is that example of the top 3 brewery in a city API, right? So orchestrations can be very, very simplistic. So all this one's doing is going out and hitting a specific connector. Okay, so if I come into this connector, and I'm not going to go too far into the weeds today, but in here, it automatically brings in my standard URL. I'm determining I want to do, right, the first 3. And then I'm passing in, this is where you determine your variable. So this is a by city variable. So I would do my $, and then my parentheses city. And that's how I'm able to grab a value from a row, a grid, a form, wherever it might be, and pass that information directly into my API. So I'm grabbing that information in here, passing in my city based on, right, whatever row I'm specifically selected on. And you can also manipulate the output, okay? So if it's an output where it is always fixed in terms of where each of the different pieces are inside of that output, you can determine variable names to grab from that output to pass into something like a message, right? So I knew in this specific API, there's going to be 3 records that come back to me, right? So I can have kind of a hard-coded 3 records that I am pulling out from a variable perspective. You can also go down the path of utilizing an array. So if you want to grab everything that is associated to this and have it build out an array for you, you can do that. This is just doing it more so I could pass it into a specific message that I am running, okay? So I'm passing in my city, and then I'm pulling back all of this information and utilizing this variable to pass it into my message, okay? So if I back up, you're thinking, okay, I see the variables. How do I get those on a message? Now, if you come here, you'll notice you pass in all of those variables in this view here. So you see I had my option 1, my option 2, and my option 3. And it knew, based on my variable name, which values to put inside of each of these. Okay, so it's a really cool way that allows you to, manage these messages and lay them out in a way that makes the most sense to you or to whoever that end user is. All right, and those messages can be built out in any way that makes the most sense to you. And I wanted to just show something too. So if you come in here and I do Albany, because I wanted to show you, this is the example, this is the output, right, when I test that connection. And you'll see, since I have 3, I am able to very easily ID, okay, I've got these 3 records, so I pick and choose which ones do I want to pull back into the message. If there are situations to where the array or the information could be scattered, depending on what you're doing, that'd be more of a situation you want to use an array, because it's not going to be as consistent for you. Now the weather one is very, very similar, right? So in this weather forecast, it's just me doing a connector again. But in here, instead of the city, I'm passing in an X and a Y, so a latitude and a longitude, right? That's how the weather gov calculates kind of the weather of where you are. So I'm passing in what is my latitude, what is my longitude, and it's giving me back the information associated to that. Okay, so it's Pretty simplistic, right? And the same type of thing, you could always come in here, test it, put in your values, run it, and have it bring back any information that is associated to this specific API. So this is me grabbing information from an API and pulling it in to into JDE. Now, let's say I want to generate a file and I want to send it from JDE out to an FTP, out to a third-party system, whatever it might be, right? Very, very simple to do. I could come in and just do this form request here, and the example here is I want to pull all the sales orders that were created today, okay? So the only difference that you have to do to be able to generate a file is I come in here to my messages, and you'll see I'm going to generate this file, and it could be a single file, it could be a zipped file. So when I run this job, whether it's on the scheduler or by an end user, it's going to put it on a temp FTP, which you can move from one FTP to another drive, but it's going to go ahead and generate a file for you to process. Okay, so if I go ahead here, run it. You'll notice down here at the bottom, it automatically generated this file for me, and it's going to put it out on that FTP for me to process it. So whether it's me pulling things inbound, API, files, or outbound, same thing, files or API. You start with your connections, you create your connector, and that's really it. So it's not a hugely technical exercise, but it allows you to really expand what JD can do from a processing perspective. Okay. So now we're going to jump into some process automation inside of JDE. Okay, so let me first just get here. So just a couple examples we're going to be going through today. Speed status update, see that all the time with so many customers where they want to speed status update a sales order. And they don't want to have to go into speed status update, put in the status, click the OK button, go back. They want to be able to just do this in mass, right? A lot of organizations hold orders until they hear from customers or whatever it might be. So how is there a way, right, we can add a button to a screen to automatically do your speed status update? So let's say for this example here, I'm looking up 154818. And the current next status is 540. And when I am ready to ship these products, I want to speed status it to a 560. And this can be a whatever status that you want, but it's the process of me running a form request to update a status. I could just come in here and say, you know what, this one's ready for shipment, run it, and boom, automatically updates that row, or as many rows as you may have selected, right? So huge opportunity just from an efficiency perspective. I see this a lot from things like, and I'm going to run through just a couple of use cases, right? Because we've only got an hour today, so I'd love to show you how all of these work, right? But the premise of all of these are we're leveraging Orchestrator and creating a trigger via something like a form extension, right? So you'll see in here, this is a button or the update. So that is what's driving the trigger for a lot of these. Now, another example I hear all the time is, hey, I've got all these orders, right? And I need to be able to update something like a date a little bit faster than I do it today, right? So I want to be able to do something like, hey, I want to update my requested date on a bunch of orders. And I want to do it in mass, and I don't want to have to go through each of them and click them individually. But what you could do is you can come and say, you know what, I'm going to select these two, and I'm going to put in my new date. These are 3/28. Let's just do 3/30/2023. Update. So what that's doing is running through all those rows, and boom, all of those now are at the same exact date. So great example from an automation perspective of how can I update orders in mass, whether it's pricing, dates, categorization, statuses, anything, right? All of those can be done via these different orchestrations. And once again, to get in here, this is how I, kind of generate that trigger. So in here, you can associate your orchestrations. You'll see in here, I have these two. So if I select in here, you're going to see, based on the button that I'm selecting, what orchestration, defining my inputs, right? What input am I passing in, and how I'm doing all of that execution. Okay, so form extensions is your trigger. Orchestration is what's doing kind of all the work on the back end. So another example around something like sales orders, and actually let me go ahead and update. I'm going to pull up a specific order real quick. So 42. So these are some orders that I have for a specific customer, all right? And maybe this is a customer where I have to put a hold on their account, right? Maybe they reached and said, hey, hold all of our sales orders. We need to do X, Y, and Z, or whatever it might be. And I want to come in and go through and just go AR. Let's go to my billing. Let's put them on a specific hold, right? Save it. And when you're doing that, remember we talked about those batch jobs that I can run? You'll see when I click the OK button, it went and ran that specific batch job for these orders. And if I click find, it automatically put every order associated to this specific customer on hold. So just once again, hey, not having to go and run the batch job manually, having it pass in the customer number and know which orders to update, very, very large amount of efficiencies that you can gain. And this is across any type of process. Remember, I'm just showing you some examples today around sales orders, but anything, any update, any entry, any automation, hey, I want to go have the system do 10 different things, right? Orchestrator can do those types of functions for you in the background. Another one, reversing purchase orders, is always something that people just aren't huge fans of. So let me go ahead and come here real quick. And while I'm waiting, I got a couple of questions. Okay, so question is, if I want to upload an Excel file into my advanced pricing, a second, I'm trying to get this. If I want to upload an Excel file into my advanced pricing, the file is in my local drive, do I still need to set up a connection? Yes, you need to have a connection to the whatever FTP is being consumed on. Now, there are the option, and this is something that came out fairly recently, where you can associate the file that you are processing on your compose page. So that may be more of the example that would be beneficial for you, where you're not putting it on a drive, you're putting it more on a dragging and dropping it into the view. But that's something that we would just need to look at based on your specific needs. So the example that I wanted to talk about was, well, kind of a couple of things. One, the ability to update rows that don't have a QBE line. Okay, so example, if I wanted to go and update this row here, and I wanted to go and right-click find, come in here, go to my sales order detail. I can't QBE, right? I don't have a QBE line here where I can say, hey, only update line number 2, because I don't want to update line number 1. In the past, you had to create kind of a workaround with determining how many lines there are and how many are open and blah, blah, blah. Now what you can do, let's say we go through that process, and I'll generate a recorded process real quick. I first come in, I put in my order number, I click find, go to my sales order detail revisions. I'm just going to update my second line to $500. Let's call this recording UX1. All right, so all this is doing is creating my form request, nothing else, but it is generating or capturing all of the clicks that I made inside of the system, okay? So once I've done that, I can now jump over here to my Orchestrator Studio. Just clear all my cache. So what you're going to notice in here, right? All of this is fine, selecting the first row and all that's fine. But this is the line where I'm having to determine what row to update. And maybe not every time I need to update row number 2. Now there's this little filter button. So I can say, hey, even though it's not a QBE line, I want to update based on something like a line number, right? So line number is equal to line. And now if I pass in that line number, it's going to be able to auto filter itself without having that specific QB line. So that was like a game changer when that came out. So I want to make sure everyone who is learning Orchestrator and leveraging the tool, they are kind of aware of that feature, because it is pretty awesome. Now, once you've generated your process recording and created your form requests, the next awesome thing is, from here, it's not an orchestration yet, right? It's just its own service request. You can't run this without having it be an orchestration. So what you can actually do is come here and do this create orchestration. And all the mapping and the transformations and everything that you need to do automatically is done. So you'll see it gives me my name. If I save it here, I'll show you. Once I save it, so all my transformations, right, are automatically done. It brings in all of my specific inputs that I need to pass, right? So it's a really, really cool function to do. It's right, just making it easier, right, for you to generate different orchestrations. And then the final one, and I talked about it a little bit earlier, was around reports. So just remember, if you get the question from someone in your business, right? Hey, I don't run that version, I run this version. No big deal. Leverage this variable, pass in the key, which determines which specific version they should be running, and you're good to go. So we're about 5 minutes before the end of the hour. I want to pause there. I know I answered one question. I'm going to go ahead and look to see if there's any other ones. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, I'll let everyone have everyone jump off a little bit early. What I would say is, if you're going out to Blueprint, I'll be there, so please feel free to stop by the booth. It would be great to see you, and thanks for hanging out for an hour with me today. Have a great rest of your day.